Manuel Navarrete over at UFO Clearinghouse, not too long after that October 5th sighting, received a sighting report from a witness who said he saw a giant-sized bat fly overhead outside of a wedding reception in Rosemont, Illinois. And so this was supposed to have taken place at around 10 p.m. on October 19th. So this witness says that he was staying at the Edward Hotel in Rosemont, Illinois for a wedding he was attending that was being held there at that hotel. And so during the reception and dance, he stepped outside to smoke a cigarette and sort of get away from the noise and everything. And he was walking towards the parking lot smoking and just sort of checking his phone when he said he heard this loud scream. And so he said it sounded like a woman screaming, actually. So he was obviously very startled. And he looked up in the direction of where the scream was coming from, really hoping that it wasn't actually a woman in danger. I mean, nobody would want that. And so next to the parking lot, he said there was this large field with some trees, but it was really mostly just a large vacant lot. And so he used his cell phone's flashlight to sort of light the way, and he didn't see anything, except darkness, really. And so he walks over to this gravel path that's between the parking lot and the field, and that's when he heard something that he described as wings flapping. And then he says he saw something fly right over the top of him, maybe, no more than 7 to 10 feet over his head. He actually said that he could have easily thrown a rock and hit it. It was so close. And he described this thing as, once again being about 6 feet tall, or really at least 6 feet tall was his actual exact words, and said it was solid black with these large wings. And so he actually described it as looking more like a giant-sized bat that just flew right over top of him. And so that's actually pretty similar to the October 5th sighting, if you consider the height that he's describing and the fact that it was solid black, or at least it seemed solid black. Now, he didn't mention anything like, red glowing eyes or anything like that, but, it was a pretty quick sighting. Now, the one caveat to this particular sighting, and he was very upfront and forward about this, is that he was at a wedding reception, so he did have a couple of drinks before this happened. That doesn't make him a better witness, certainly, but it also doesn't mean that he's necessarily, lying or even mistaken. But it would, in my mind, I think, call into question all of it if his was the only sighting. But there was the previous sighting on October 5th, and there were sightings after. So we actually had, not long after that, this would have been October 29th, a woman who really insisted on anonymity. I still have been unable to completely verify her identity. So this is sort of one that I personally take with a grain of salt. But again, with everything else going on, it's at least worth taking a look at it. So this was in Rosemont, Illinois, also. And so this report actually came from a woman who said that she couldn't sleep one night, and so she decided to take a walk and sit for a few minutes in the cold, and thought, maybe that would make her sleepy, just sort of relax her or something, which apparently is something that she likes to do, when she's suffering from insomnia. And so she put on her jacket and she went outside, and she goes to this park nearby, and there is a gazebo there that she likes to sit in. And so she's sitting in her usual place there in the gazebo, and she said she hadn't been there for more than maybe 5 minutes when she saw what she said was a very tall man standing across the way from the gazebo, like within her eyesight there, and she described this man as being very unusually tall and very thin, and said that he was standing next to what looked like a smaller man, but the smaller man was very frail and thin with a just proportionately large head. And they seemed to be conversing, but she couldn't hear anything. She was too far away. And so as she watched them, she said a pair of women walked up and just stood there, sort of in a daze. And so at that point, she said that the tall man did something that really just scared the crap out of her, honestly. She said that he unfurled these huge wings and stretched them out and then tucked them back in as the women approached, almost like, just stretching, like maybe you would stretch your arms, and at that point, the smaller man with the disproportionately large head turned to the two women, and suddenly the area was bathed in this bright blue light, and, like the light maybe lasted for 1 or 2 seconds, but then, once it had dissipated, only the tall winged being was left. The small man and the two dazed women had seemingly disappeared, according to this witness. And so at that point, she said she watched this thing, whatever it was, unfurl its wings and walked away, down the steps by where it was standing, took a step or two and flew away, which is a pretty incredible sighting, frankly. And again, because of the sort of limited contact we had with this witness, this was one where Manuel Navarrete over at UFO Clearinghouse had received the initial report, and then he had given Lon and I both this witness's contact info, which was basically her email address. And so, I had her name and I had her email address, and we had some limited contact with her, but nobody really ever got her on the phone, and certainly we couldn't meet in person or anything. And so this is one where I think we had just enough contact with this witness to really warrant publishing it. Because normally, if I just had very limited email access with somebody, I probably wouldn't even run with that story because I wasn't able to verify most of it. But the details that we were given in this story were details that we were able to verify, just mundane things like geographic data and weather data and stuff. And so, we're just sort of left wondering, but it's a very interesting story, and again, sort of taken in the larger context of this sighting flap, I think it does become interesting, because now even more recently than that, we have been receiving more sightings from the area. Now, this specifically is back in the area, like the immediate vicinity of O'Hare International Airport. So now, the end of November 26th, a witness contacted Manuel Navarrete over at UFO Clearinghouse and said that he was a truck driver, and he was at the airport picking up a load at I hope I'm saying this right, Nippon Cargo Airlines, and he had his truck backed up to the dock, and he's standing just a little ways away, and he's smoking a cigarette while they load the truck up, which is it's exactly the kind of detail I think that makes the story realistic. And he said he was looking over towards the runways in the direction of the tunnel, and that's when he noticed something that looked like a large bird standing just outside of the fence by the parking lot. So, I mean, it was not easy to miss. I mean, it was pretty big, and there's two street lamps over there. So, it was lit up well enough, and he said it looked like a person with wings that were sort of stretched out and flapping. And he said it was walking away from the fence toward the open field, and then it began to flap its wings, and it disappeared. And so, Manuel was able to get a hold of this guy over the phone. Now, he did primarily speak Spanish, but they were able to still communicate, and he had his daughter and her boyfriend there, and so they were able to get the full story out. But he was able to sort of gauge the size of this thing, whatever it was, using the fence as a point of reference. So he described it as being just about 7 feet tall compared to the fence that he was near. And so, obviously, that's bigger than any bird that we're going to have walking around, walking anywhere in the Midwest. I mean, that's enormous. And so, he even described the wings, interestingly enough, and this is something we've seen even in the earlier reports from this little sighting flap, as being roughly the same, width as it was tall, which again, it would be very unusual for any bird species. Really, that's unusual for anything that you would expect to actually be able to fly. And he also reported feeling this sense of evil, like what he was looking at, like there was just something wrong about what he was looking at, which is interesting because the final report and witness that I have, the most recent one, as far as what's actually been investigated so far, actually described the same thing. So this was a guy who said that on the night of December 6th, he'd seen a red-eyed winged humanoid while he was driving, leaving work, because he actually works at O'Hare International Airport. He works in cargo over there, and so he actually emailed me, and I was able to talk to him over the phone, and he seemed like a very normal, forthright young man, honestly. And so I talked to him for a while about his experience, and it was a pretty innocuous beginning to his evening. So he had gotten off work early that night, and it was about 10:15 or 10:20 p.m., and he's driving down West Higgins, which is just a street by the airport there, because he's leaving work, and he was going to head to the bar and meet up with one of his friends, and he was sort of scanning this like grassy area by the roadway there, because it's a place where normally deer like to hang out, and so he's usually just keeping an eye out for stuff like that, because you don't want a deer to jump into the road in front of you or something. And so when he was looking over there, he noticed in the ambient light of these buildings set sort of back a little ways away from the road there, he saw basically the same thing as the guy who had his sighting on November 26th. So he sees this, 7 foot tall, dark, winged, humanoid being, and he feels this, he's instantly terrified, and he feels this sense of evil as he described it to me. And the only real difference, honestly, between this guy's sighting and the November 26th sighting was this most recent witness said that he saw these glowing red eyes. And he was blown away, obviously. And, he wasn't even going to tell anybody, actually, because he told me that, he at first thought he was going crazy, and that's pretty common. He thought he was losing his mind, but then he actually ended up seeing one of the articles that we had written soon after, and that's what inspired him to come forward with his story. So, I don't know what's going on at O'Hare down in Chicago, but it's something. And